Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So we finally got the Fox suspension installed, and now for the comparison. Okay, so let's talk about a few changes I've made with the 4Runner since the last video I shot. I've added rock sliders, some skid plates, a roof rack, and it's all added weight to the suspension, which has started to sag the stock coils for the Bilstein suspension. So to start, we'll just talk about the RSG rock sliders. They're 50 pounds on each side, so it's 100 pounds total added weight. All right, so next, let's talk about the skid plates. The 4Runner came with a TRD factory aluminum skid plate. So what I added was RCI gas tank, transmission skid, transfer case skid, and then there's an integration skid. So far, all I've actually put on was the gas tank skid and the transfer case skid. The combined weight of those is 101 pounds. I haven't added the other two skids because it's just too much weight for the Bilstein suspension. Okay, so in the rear, on the inside, I've added the Rago fabrication molly panels. They don't actually have like a listed weight. I'd estimate probably about 25 pounds with both panels installed. All right, so next up we have the roof rack. It's from Sherpa Equipment Company, and it's the full length Crestone rack, so it weighs a total of 50 pounds. So some of the final things I want to talk about weight, I've added pods with the little mounts up front. They really aren't that much weight. I'd probably say under 10 pounds for total. Other things to consider, the unsprung weight of the new wheels and tires adds extra weight underneath the suspension as it cycles. So these are all the changes I've made. If we add everything up and I do the math correctly, it's about 275, 280 pounds total that I've added. And that doesn't seem like a lot. It's like having an extra passenger or two, but it does affect how well the Bilstein suspension works off-road. All right, here we're gonna measure the ride height differences between the two suspensions. So we already went over a little bit. With the added weight, the 2.5 inches that I was supposed to get out of the Bilstein suspension is now more around 2 inches. And then the other thing is I've added a 33-inch tall tire, so the tire's a little bit taller. So we're just gonna remeasure everything. So right here is the Bilstein suspension, and we'll go over, the middle of the wheel and the middle of the fender to see the actual ride height. So right about there is 36 3/4 of an inch. So we'll install the Fox suspension and then see what the difference is in ride height. All right, so now we have the Fox suspension installed and we're gonna remeasure the ride height. Obviously, just looking at it, you can tell that it's quite a bit higher. So let's see what the actual numbers are. So right in the middle of the tire and the fender, it's about 38.5 inches. So that's overall an 1 3/4 height increase by adding the Fox suspension from the Bilstein. A few other things I want to go over about the suspension. So we installed it and it sits pretty high with 7/8 of an inch thread showing. And because those measurements aren't really accurate based on the AccuTune website, I was kind of guessing how high I'd get to achieve like a 2.5 inch ride height. I also put about 1,000 miles on it, so I was hoping the springs would settle and sink down just a little bit, but it still rides a little high in the front. I think it's almost level with the Fox suspension and the 1.5 inch coils in the rear, but it might be just a little bit high in the front with the 600-pound springs. Maybe I'll add a bumper with a winch in the front and it'll bring it down just a little bit so the threads showing are perfect. But for right now, if I were to do it again, I might adjust the preload so there's not quite as much thread showing. All right, so now we're here over on the passenger side, and one of the things I forgot to measure the Bilstein suspension on the passenger side, but roughly The 4Runner lean is about a 1/2 inch on the driver's side, so it tends to be a 1/2 inch lower. Considering that fact, I added a thread of preload on the driver's side to see if that would compensate for the lean. So we'll see what the difference here on this side is. And right about the middle of the tire, it's 39¼ inches. So it's about a 1/2 inch taller on this side than the driver's side, which is probably way too tall for this side, for the CVs and everything that cycles in the suspension. So the one thread on the other side was not enough because of all the weight in the 4Runner lean. And then the bad thing is, to adjust these, you got to take the entire Fox shock off and then reduce the preload. So as you can see, just winging it didn't really work out too well. However, it does look good with the lift. It's probably not optimal for cycling the suspension with the CV angle and all that though. Just something to consider. Okay, in this section we're going to do the brake test again to test how much the 4Runner dips with the two different suspensions. So we've already gone over all the weight I've added to the 4Runner. And so we're going to start with the Bilstein suspension and then install the Fox suspension and give you an apples to apples side-by-side comparison. Hey guys, so we have a little dip on this off-road trail that I hit just about every day, and when I run the Bilstein suspension through it, it really just bottoms out the whole suspension due to the added weight that I've put on the 4Runner. So the dip really doesn't look like that much of a dip. However, you know, it wrecks the Bilstein suspension. So we'll run them both through here, one with the Fox as well, to show you a comparison. Okay, now that we've done just a small section of the trail, we're going to run the 4Runner up all the way and give you an extended view of the suspension in action. What's a good off-road rig if you can't jump it, right? Okay, so now that we've watched the comparison in action, let's talk about a few things. So one of the things, the biggest difference with the Bilstein suspension and the Fox suspension is the Fox uses a new 600-pound spring rate spring. The Bilstein suspension reuses the 550-pound spring. So, you know, there's a difference in the braking. The Bilstein dips a little more in the braking. The ride height is affected with all the extra weight that I added. Some of the off-road tests, the Bilstein suspension just bottoms out quicker. A lot of that I think could have been alleviated if I would have just got 600-pound springs for the Bilstein suspension. There's a couple companies out there, Old Man Emu and Toy Tech Lifts that I know of, that offer a new spring for the Bilstein suspension. So that would have changed quite a few of the suspension characteristics when comparing the Fox versus the Bilstein. When we're doing the test runs for the up the hill and down the hill runs with the Bilstein, the reservoirs really matter, because even after just 2 or 3 runs trying to get that perfect drone angle, the Bilstein suspension was losing dampening, and it felt quite a bit squishier when going up and down the hill multiple times. That's where the reservoirs really come into play. They keep the shock cooler and help maintain the damping ability of the shock. Not only with that, the larger size diameter of the shock of the Fox, the 2.5, allows more oil capacity inside to also help maintain cooling. One of the big differences on higher speed runs, because the Foxes can maintain that damping ability, the Foxes feel quite a bit more controlled on longer off-road runs through a longer trail, where the Bilsteins quickly fade, and that's a noticeable difference in performance. In the jumping section, honestly, there wasn't really a whole lot of difference. It was just kind of fun to jump the 4Runner. One thing I did notice in the video, the Fox suspension, when it lands, it tends to kick up the rear a little bit more, so the rebound is maybe a little too much for the Fox suspension, but most people aren't going to jump their 4Runners, so it really, I don't think, is a big deal. After all said and done, would I buy Fox again? A little bit of yes and a little bit of no. One of the reasons why no is the Fox's, this setup right here is really expensive. With Icon upper control arms and the Fox suspension, the total package was about $4,500. And that's not cheap for suspension for a 4Runner. It's probably, you know, the higher end kit and the higher price that you'll pay. Now, especially with the inflation that's been going on, this same kit is over $5,000. That's compared to the Bilstein, which when I purchased the Bilstein kit, the total was roughly $650. Granted, there is a huge difference in performance with $650 versus $4,500, but let's jump to a little whiteboard action and I'll show you what I think about that. Okay, this is how I kind of visualize the performance between the Bilstein and the Fox when it comes to price and then overall performance. So we'll start with the Bilstein. The Bilstein, you know, has a lower intro price, so you kind of get what you pay for, and so it has a lower intro performance. So over stock, you know, I said it would probably be about 20% better than stock. So, you know, as far as performance, about 20%, and then because it is quite a bit cheaper, we'll say it's about 20%. So the Bilstein, you know, has a relatively equal amount of performance for the price you get. So if we go to Fox, the issue that I have with Fox is because they are so expensive, and is that expense really worth all the performance, or does it really create all that performance? So to me, you know, if we're going to trace the performance line I have here, Foxes go up to, we'll say like 80% performance for the price, but then at some point the performance tops out and then the price just continues to increase to, you know, the top of the line one that you can get. So if you're willing to spend money and you kind of like the bling factor of the Foxes, then this really shouldn't matter that much to you. However, you know, because they are so expensive and there is kind of a cap, in my opinion, on the performance, then they might not be worth you spending all that money for them. All right, so now that you saw the comparison of price versus performance, one of the other things we need to talk about is the Icon upper control arms. So after all the research and all the practical use that I've done, I really do like the Icon upper control arms. I think they work really well. The problem with the Icon upper control arms to me is they're $800 for the set. And there are a lot of companies out there that make anywhere from $500 to $600 range. After doing all the research, I don't know that the upper control arm matters that much as all these aftermarket companies say they do. When testing the stock upper control arm with the suspension just moving up and down, the suspension doesn't actually bind or stop here at the upper control arm. The suspension stops droop travel at the shock. So the shock is the limiting factor in the suspension and not the stock upper control arm and the ball joint angle and all that. So then if the ball joint doesn't really matter and you don't need increased angle, one thing that does matter is the amount of space you have around the new larger coil. So the stock upper control arms for the 4Runner actually sometimes would touch the Bilstein suspension at full droop. So like I showed you in the previous video, the Fox coils are a lot larger in diameter, and so you need more clearance inside the arm when upgrading shocks. So that's the only reason why I would buy aftermarket upper control arms, is to clearance larger shocks. And for that reason, there are a lot of companies, like I said, that make the cheaper version. So if I did the upper control arms again, I would just find like the Bilstein or Dobinson's or even Dirt King makes a set that are lower in price. So another consideration, if I were to do it all again, Bilstein works okay for mild use, but if I weren't buying Bilstein or the Fox, I would definitely get shocks with remote reservoirs. They help maintain the damping ability of the shock, and on longer runs, your shocks will just maintain their performance. I don't know that the adjusters are necessarily that important. The adjusters, just on the Fox suspension, to add adjusters, there's a $350 difference for the front and then a $433 difference from the rear. So in total, it's about $783 just to add adjusters. Right now, the low speed compression is set all the way to firm and the high speed compression is set all the way to soft. So I've tested them, gone off-roading quite a bit, and those settings are where I like them, and then I'm just gonna kind of leave it there and not change it at all. I don't really see a reason to be always changing it. The other problem with the adjusters is the actual adjuster itself is not as easy as you think to adjust. I'll show you a little clip trying to change it, and it actually takes quite a bit of force, and it's not quite as functional as I was expecting. I don't know how much the compression adjusters actually make a difference in performance. To me, it felt like anywhere from 10 to 20%, and I don't know if that's worth the extra $783 just to add that little bit of adjustment range when I'm just gonna set it and then not change it anymore. Would I buy Fox again? That's the big question, right? The answer is no, I would not. I think the higher price, it deters me, especially after watching the graph. The performance tops out and then it just kind of, you're paying for the brand name, which Foxes are good. And when you lower the tire pressure to 20 PSI, the Foxes work really well. However, there are other options out there if you really want the adjusters. I've seen the Dobinson's MRR suspension, and they actually have dual speed compression and rebound adjustments, so you can even adjust them further. Plus the price point is quite a bit lower. So I'd be interested in seeing how those would perform compared to these two that we've done. Another company that I'd be interested in trying out is the Toytech Illuma Series 2.5 coilovers. Now, they don't come with adjusters, but like I said, I don't know that the adjusters really matter that much. However, the price point too is quite a bit lower, and the important thing for those is they come with the remote reservoirs. The third option I would try, and these are kind of higher in price, is the Oldman Emu BP51. I was actually considering buying those when I bought the Foxes. The only reason why I didn't is some of the adjustments, if you watch a couple of reviews of those, the adjustments are a little bit harder to make with the compression and rebound. So I just didn't really care for the ease of use with the adjustments. I hope we covered everything that you would like to see. If we missed anything in the video that you want more information, leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and if you're interested in more videos, hit the subscribe button.